My late husband, Mike, was in a car accident, and I was searching for like the meaning, right? What was the purpose behind this? Mm-hmm. Some people may never find that meaning.
Yeah.
For me, it's Billy's place. And so I know Mike, I know if he could see what was happening, I mean, he'd lay down his life for that any minute, for how many people he's helped.
This is the Lost Child Podcast. These are real stories from real people sharing some of their darkest moments with us and their journey from that fateful experience. We have a guest with us here today, and she's going to share a little bit about her story. Let's dive into the podcast. Thank you, Julie, for coming on the podcast and just being with us here in this room.
Yeah, and it's a pleasure. I'm happy to be here and answer any questions I can. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And just so for everybody that is listening, Julie is a co-founder of Billy's Place, which is a local place here in Phoenix. And we're just going to talk about her story of where she came from, how she was able to create Billy's Place, and kind of where it's come from in the last 10, 11 years. I think from what I figured online, it was you created it in 2012 or 2013, something right there?
Well, 2012, we started filling out all that wonderful paperwork.
Okay.
And it took about a year for us to get the game plan down. And then we had our first group October of 2013.
Cool.
So we just had our 10-year anniversary not too long ago. And so, going on 11 years now.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And where did you get the whole idea to come up with about Billy's Place?
So Billy is my son.
Okay.
And in 2005, my late husband, Mike, was in a car accident. We lived back in Illinois at the time. And he got in a car accident, which he ended up passing away from.
Yeah.
And probably around, Billy at the time was 15 months old. And so, at that time, I didn't know much about grief. I was 30 years old. And, you don't think at that time you're going to be a widow.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know too much about grief, but I kind of thought, oh, he doesn't know what's going on. Later, I find out that if you're old enough to love, you're old enough to grieve.
Yeah.
So many people think babies don't grieve, and they really do. They just do it in different ways, acting out, like crying, all of that, clinginess, waking up in the middle of the night, all of that comes, they do grieve. And so, that basically, in the very beginning, I started hearing more about grief and reading about it. When Billy was probably about 3.5, I started to notice anger. He started to get angry more, and he started to recognize dads. And, that was a little bit difficult. And I can remember we were out riding bikes. I was trying to teach him how to ride a bike. And he got so mad and he threw his bike down and he said, "I want a dad." And I was just like, oh man. And so I knew we needed help.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what to do with that. So I went to the doctor and I'm like, could you help me? What should I do here? Like, should I take him to counseling, or what should I do? And they're like, well, he's a little young for counseling. There's always medicine that could, you could give him to settle him down. And I just didn't like that approach at such a young age. And everything I was reading was that grief is normal. And so I kept looking, and, I was praying a lot. I was like, God, show me something. I don't know what to do. And it was so weird. It was like, not even a week later, I was looking through, you get those little magazines, the newspapers that nobody really reads.
Yeah, in the mail.
Well, I was looking through it and I'm like, what is this? And it was called Margaret Ann's Place. And it was a grief support center it was right inside Milwaukee. So we weren't very far from that. We were in Illinois, but we were right on the border. And so we went there, and by that time, I think Billy had just turned 4. And we went in for an orientation, and he was at his age, he was super, he was very outward going. And so she's like, yeah, he's ready for group, and he loved it. So just being around other kids that had said, oh, my dad died too, like in the group, I think just hearing them made him feel not so alone, you know, knowing he's not the only person that doesn't have a dad. I mean, your circle is small at 4, 5, 6. They don't know. They're not the only, you know, they have their cousins and a few friends, but that just made him feel so, so good, I guess, in a weird way, seeing that there's other people.
Yeah.
So they did all sorts of like little projects to help them deal with the anger and memories. And it was great. So
was this a thing that you would go drop him off at, or you would go to also and be there with him, or was he like in his own group?
Yeah, no, I would go as well. And so it was about a 2-hour meeting.
Oh, wow.
And then we would go in the beginning. And I loved, it was like an old, like Victorian home. It was like a grandma's home. It had a wraparound like porch, and you would walk inside, and it was all furniture. It really looked like a grandma's home. Like all the furniture was probably donated, but it had that like warm, cozy feeling. And so they had different rooms in there. We would go with other adults who had lost a spouse. And at my age, I didn't know anybody who had lost a spouse. And so I was for the first time with people who had lost a spouse. So that was super comforting. And then Billy was with other kids, you know.
Were there other people then that were your age as well?
There were, you know, I was definitely on the younger side. At that time I was only, because this was about 2 or 3 years later, I was, 33 at the time. So I still was on the younger part.
Okay.
But it was still good for me to hear just from other people and how they dealt with it. I was kind of the baby of the group, so they helped me with a lot of different things that parenting that I hadn't even thought of. So it was super helpful for me. And like I said, Billy had 4 or 5 friends that he started knowing in group. And as soon as I would come in there, and he would be like, oh, and he'd go play with them and, his little groups and stuff. So it was great. But in that, I decided winter was not for me. I'm like, after, I think it was like 14 days of no sun, I was ready to move out to Arizona. I had 2 brothers that lived out there. So, and they both had families. So I went ahead and moved out here. And there was one grief support center at the time that was an amazing grief support center, but it was a little bit further away from us. And so I thought, oh, I'd love to have one closer to where I was. And so that's when we started Billy's Place. And, but what happened before then, I moved out here in 2008, and, all that time, like, I kept thinking like, oh, I would love to replicate that, Margaret Ann's place. And I was a hairstylist for 18 years. So that's not really something that's easy to do.
Yeah.
So I kept thinking like, how am I going to do this? And I started like talking to my sister-in-law, who she's in marketing. She went to school for marketing. And my sister-in-law is someone that can do anything. Like she's a decorator. She can do anything really. And so I started asking her, and she's like, Juli, a grassroots nonprofit is super hard to do.
Yeah.
Here's also a reminder to subscribe and follow this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. Now, back to the podcast.
And so I'm like, okay. And out of the blue, my pastor asked me if I'd want to work in the church office. And I'm like, well, I don't really have any admin skills. I'm like, but I know how to talk. I like to talk. And so he's like, well, yeah, it's pretty much just answering the phone and stuff and taking notes. I'm like, oh, I can do that. No problem. Well, when I went in there, he's the former secretary answering phone girl was like, no, this admin position, Julie, is like, do you know Word Doc? Do you know Microsoft Word and all this stuff at Publisher? And I'm like, I don't know even what you're talking about because I didn't know how to really even use a computer.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh my gosh. She's like, so she was just laughing. She's like, this seems like something Brad would do. And so she was, I always said she was a godsend. So she wrote a manual out for me for everything.
Wow.
And I mean, for a year I needed her, but that first month of work, I was like in tears. Like, this is crazy. So I stayed there for probably about 4 years, and I knew pretty much everything going out of there that I would need to know for a nonprofit.
Oh, wow.
And so it was on my heart all through that time. I kept thinking about, what I wanted to do. And I felt like God put it upon my heart. And so I asked my sister-in-law again, and she's like, a few different times during this. She's like, Julie, it's just a lot of work.
Were these like sit down meetings, or was it just kind of just like casually, like you're together, like, hey, we should do this type of thing?
Yep.
Or was it like
I would just like casually, when we would be together, I'd be like, this is so on my heart. So,
and at this time, were you and Billy going to the grief group that was in the valley?
Okay. Yeah, we did go, and it was a great group, but it was about 45 minutes, away from our house, which, I mean, I definitely was fine to do, but he was like in kindergarten, first grade at the time.
Yeah.
So, it's just hard to do that. And I still just had this vision of what I wanted to create myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, so we just, I kept asking her about it. She was just like, no. Well, I had this woman at my church, and I was telling her about it one day, and she's like, I can help you with that paperwork. And so we started, and I had my first board of directors, which probably wasn't at the time. I don't even know if you could, but it was like my dad. It was my husband. I mean, we just started someplace, and it ended up, she had another project to work on. And so I was kind of floundering, like I was doing as much as I could. I had like a candle event at West Wing, and my sister-in-law came to it, and I think she saw like I needed help. And so bless her heart, she was like, okay, let's talk about this. So we took my family out to dinner, and we went out to eat and said, okay, guys, this is what our plan is. And then we told them what we were planning on doing. And so we're like, but we need your help. And they were in on it. And so from there, it just kind of kept going. And for that 2012, we went out with other grief support centers just to see what they had to say. And just kind of researched about grief. I had Dr. Alan Wolfelt. I really loved his approach to grief. It was more about companioning people, not fixing them.
Yeah.
And so I really love that, that theory of really just letting yourself heal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to look different for everybody. So I love that. And so I taught under him. I had learned, went to a few seminars that he had that was in Fort Collins, Colorado, and it was amazing. So did that, and yes, Billy's Place was birthed out of that. So it was pretty cool.
So how did you kind of like advertise then and be like, hey, come to Billy's Place?
Yeah.
How did that go?
That was tricky. It was just word of mouth at that time. And my son went to West Wing School.
Okay.
And so word of mouth through there. I knew a lot of moms and stuff. So I would just start spreading the word. And at that time, there was a family that she had lost her husband, and I think they had five kids. So that was a big start to it. And I think for our first group, we had 3 families. And so we still have video of that first night. And that was our beginning, our first group. My church allowed us to use a support group there. So, and they let us use the office on Fridays. So that was like the day we would do our office work. So it's pretty cool.
And was that in that first group, were you kind of like the coach or the leader through it? Or were you a participant and you had somebody else come in and help do some of that? Or where did you, and then on top of that, where did you get your curriculum from?
Yeah. So the curriculum, when we went ahead and started it, I asked the lady from Margaret Ann's place that Margaret Ann's place had actually gone, they didn't survive.
Oh, okay.
They ended up closing down, I think probably about like 5 years, maybe after we had left. And so Ginger, who had left there, I had still talked with her from time to time, and I had asked her if she would mentor us, and she absolutely did. And so she helped write curriculum for us.
Wow.
And so it was awesome. So we had her writing curriculum for us, and she lived in, I think, Missouri at the time. So we flew her out. She did a board training for us and trained our volunteers, which was small at the time. You guys attend now, and you guys go to, there's, I think, 4 different groups. I think at the time we had 2 or 3 different groups. So it was kind of neat to see it grow. But so we trained them. And at that time I basically did all of the families. I worked with the families and the volunteers. My sister-in-law, Chris, who also had a tragedy in her life.
Oh, wow.
Her dad and her were in a plane accident. They had a fishing resort in Canada, and they flew planes in and out of there. He was a
bush plane pilot.
Yeah. And so he ended up getting in an accident with her and her younger brother on a plane. And she was bringing her brother. The plane had flipped, and so the waters were really choppy. She brought her brother to the buoy, and so he could hold on. And then she went to go get her dad, and he had hit his head on the wing. And so she went to grab him, and he had gone under. And so they didn't find him for about 2 weeks. And so she has her brief story. So together, we just worked really hard, and she was great she did the donor side.
And did that happen before you guys started or after you guys had started?
No, that happened before. So that happened when she was about 17 years old.
Oh, okay.
And she had a brother at the time who was 8. So, so she knew the teen side of it. And I knew, the younger side, the little side of it.
Yeah.
So we were she still is really good with the teens. And I'm always really good. I love the littles area and the middles. So we complemented each other well in that area.
Cool.
That's awesome.
So even like when everything happened with Sunny and we started, people were like, you need to go to Billy's place. I would look up online on Billy's place, and I was from the outsider's perspective, I did not understand what it was. So if you were to explain to me, like I'm a first time person, or even people that have questions, what the heck is Billy's place? What is Billy's place? How would you say it in like a kind of a concise way?
Yeah. So Billy's place, we always say it's a grief support center for families who are going through grief. And it is a peer support. So basically it is, people supporting people who are going through the same loss in an age appropriate manner. So the kids are usually with other kids who are, going through the same type of loss. We try to group them with the same type of loss. So if it's a sibling they've lost, we try to put them with other siblings as much as possible.
Yeah.
If it's a dad they've lost, we try to put them with the dad. We do that as well with adults. So we will put you with other people have lost a sibling. A child, I'm sorry. I was thinking in my head, that didn't sound right. So that's huge because, people feel like every loss is so different, and a spouse loss is completely different than a child loss. So you want to be with people who have experienced the same type of loss as you. So that's kind of how I would explain it. But we do, I guess there's also that, I like to explain the part of, are we just sitting in there talking, or like, what is it? We actually have a curriculum that is based upon different needs that go on through your grief journey. So some people think they're going to come to Billy's place and just cry the whole time. But most of the time, and I'm sure you could see with Dieter, and, it's not always sad. We do memories, we do good times, we do bad times, we do anger. We do a lot of coping skills that help us through our loss. And these coping skills, I always tell parents, like, grief comes in all forms. It could be loss now in the form of death, but, we have friend loss, right? Where we could not be friends with somebody anymore, or we could move away. There's divorce. There's all sorts of things that happen in relationships that cause grief. So, this is something that we're teaching kids that we hope they can use for the rest of their lives. And even for adults, I mean, a lot of adults haven't been taught these coping skills. I know when I was 30, I wasn't taught coping skills, unless you have very in tune parents that teach you these, it's hard to know what to do and how to teach your children how to deal with these emotions.
Yeah.
These little humans that are 4, 5, and 6 years old, when you're trying to navigate grief, how am I going to teach them when I can't even make it through a day? So that's basically, that would be how I would explain it. Does that make sense? Would you think that would make sense?
Yeah. Where it's a grief support group. It's not necessarily like a therapy session or anything like that, but it's being able to get together with people that are in similar circumstances to you.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily feel alone.
Yep.
How often do the groups meet?
So depending upon what groups you attend, there is a need. So we call them add-ons. So there's always groups. So the regular family groups meet twice a month.
Okay.
And then we do have, so as starting Billy's Place, we started with the family group nights, but we learned really quick that that wasn't going to be enough, because what happens sometimes is sometimes parents want to keep going, but the child is done. They're like, okay, they're ready. They're ready to move past this grief, where they go into what we call active grief, is when, we know that they probably need more of Billy's Place. They need, we can tell they're talking about the death. They're, and not just talking about their death makes it active, but there's just signs that show that they're very involved in the grief.
Yeah.
Well, we can tell in the groups when they're maybe done. Usually after about a year, not that we put a time limit on it, but for kids, we notice they start disengaging in the group, where they might like start talking to their friends more, and goofing around in class more. They're just joyful. They may express that they don't want to come to group anymore. Parents might say, "Oh, it's just so hard to get them out the door now. They used to love coming." And that's usually a good sign that they might be at the point where they're okay, you know?
Hey, we'll jump back to the podcast in just a second. If you love what we're doing here and want to support us, we started a Patreon account. It's a platform where you can sign up for a monthly subscription to help support our podcast, to help share these stories with the world. In the video description, you can find a link to our Patreon account. So please help support the podcast and help support us by visiting the link in that video description. We thank you. Now, back to the podcast.
And so to kind of fill you back into where you were going there is you were saying that soon after you started it, you figured out, oh my gosh, there's this disconnect between parents and kids. Sometimes the parents are ready to move on or wanting to stay, or the kids are done, or the kids are wanting to stay. So there's this kind of disconnect.
Yes. And so usually that's where, like with child grief, a lot of the times the parents want to stay, you know, and the kids after a while are ready, but parents aren't. They still love that connection with the other adults.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have an adult only night.
Okay.
And so where we can, because as much as what we do is so good, it can also not be so good if a child is being forced to grieve and they just don't want to do it anymore. So that can happen with spouse, right? Like if sometimes people move on, like, and they decide they want to start dating after, 6 months, a year, and they start dating somebody and they're like, I'm not grieving, but we always like to say, we are teaching you a lot about your children and what you can offer them and how you can help them.
Yeah.
But some just don't want to continue going on, which is fine. And so then we have the kids kicking back night, which will be for them, and they can still come. It's with a great group of kids. It's a little bit more of a laid back night for them, but there's still games we play involving grief.
Yeah.
So we figured that out. And so we're glad that's an option, because we have kids that still go to that, and it might be 3 years after.
Wow.
And they just love going, and they still are asking to go. And, that could be for some, a child that's lost their mom or dad, and it's just hard, know. And usually we find that in the 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old range, when those emotions are still just really, really hard. So, and then once we see about 14, 15 years old, we noticed that kids were starting to, not really want to be with the younger kids. And so that's when we developed a teen chill night. And so that separated the teens to give them their own spot if they so chose. If not, they could still come with their family, but kind of like a youth group night, where kind of gave them a little freedom if they wanted to. Well, then we noticed there was another group of people, the young adults. We started having like 19, 20-year-olds, but there wasn't really a place for them because they couldn't really go to the adult only group. And so we have a young adult night. And most recently, we just are starting a teen online group that will be great because some can't get a ride there. So we're going to start that coming up in the fall, or coming up in January. So we're really excited for that virtual group to come up as well.
That's awesome.
It's cool how you didn't just try to force people into the package that you originally had, right? You tried to evaluate and say, hey, I see a need here. And even if when you changed to do the teen only night, the teens that was originally for maybe aren't interested anymore, but the package was still there that other teens that came could end up, using that.
Yeah. We are constantly trying to improve. And I always say this, and you guys probably had heard it in the orientation, but I always tell people, please let us know if there's something we can do better. We always need to hear that because it's the only way we can change it. And I think a lot of people are really hesitant to tell us because, our services are free to the public.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people feel like, oh, I don't really want to say anything because they feel like they're getting the services for free. But that's where all of our change has taken place, is by people saying, oh, my kids, I don't mean to be mean, but our teens just don't want to come anymore.
Yeah.
They feel it's babyish.
Mm-hmm.
That's how Teen Chill was birthed, know? So, we're always willing to hear ideas, and, that's how those next things start. So,
And then you have different activities throughout the year as well that
Mhm.
everybody can go to, right? What are some of those different ones?
So yeah, we, we didn't want to have a place also where we know what happens when a death occurs. We did not want to be bothering our families constantly with having fundraisers and all of that. So
Yeah.
we decided that we were going to we would do one fundraiser a year. And that's our Hike for Hope.
Okay.
And so that's one event that one's open to the public. That one's open to our families. They can bring extended family.
And how is that one a fundraiser?
So that one's a fundraiser. Well, actually this year we're trying something different. We're not going to charge people because it gets very difficult.
Oh.
And if people want to raise funds, they can. If they don't have to. If people are just in recently, so they've lost somebody, they don't feel like, you know what I mean, trying to get a team together. And so we're still going to have people sign up, but, if they want to raise the money, if they're up to it, great. If not, they don't have to.
Okay.
So we're going to try that this year, but basically that was how it was a fundraiser. They would pay $25, $30 for a person.
Yeah.
And then that would go towards, they would get a t-shirt. The rest would go towards Billy's Place. We also have a silent auction, and we would have sponsors. So that's our only fundraiser of the year. And so we're pretty proud that we've been able to continue that. But that is a great, a lot of people you'll see that they have it. And one of our first families, they still come to the hike. And that's the one day a year where they still celebrate their daughter, Steph. And they all have their own shirt. They have their own shirts made. And it's just a cool day that they always, after they do the hike, and then they go back to the house and they have a party. And so every year they're like, all right, they plan that day for their whole family to get together and hike. So, so that's something that we love. And then we have
on the Hike for Hope, going back to that, is it in March again this year?
It's April 2nd, that first week in April.
Okay.
It's going to be a water theme. So,
Oh, fun.
yeah, we're going to try to have it a little bit later. So the warmth, that might not help with the hike, but we figure you can go on the hike and then come back and have the water theme. So
Cool.
hopefully it'll not be too hot to hike then. But we figure you can always go early. So, but yeah, so that's going to be that first weekend. I think might be April 2nd, but, so yeah, we're excited about that. And, we have our candle lighting event, which is always held the third Thursday in November. And that's for Teens and Children's Grief Awareness Month. So it's kind of cool. We are now in Arizona schools. We have gone in there and we have 2 school bereavement ladies that go in and share our curriculum. And New York Life has also, they do a program which our school bereavement people will teach them. And then they are able to get $500 for their school. The New York Life pays them for that teaching that they get, that they receive. And they give them, brochures, all sorts of stuff to train these teachers for, what are they going to do when they have a student in their class that has lost a sibling, a parent, a grandparent. A lot of times, I've heard such sad stories where, even with my son, the first couple days back to school, what do they talk about at such a young age?
Yeah.
What did you do over school break? Over the summer break? Well, my son used to have to bring in pictures of all they did. And it would be me and him. And I would be like, do you want to put a picture of your dad up there? No, but then he would feel bad in class because he didn't have, and then he'd be like, oh, I don't have that dad there. And he's like, divorce isn't the same, because friends would be like, well, my parents got divorced. And he's like, but you still have a dad.
Yeah.
Mine isn't here. And, it was hard. He'd have meltdowns sometimes about, I don't have a coach. I want my dad to be a coach. So, stuff like that was, difficult. And, so, yeah.
I want to play a video and then get your take on the video. And holistically, it kind of goes into how creating Billy's Place has kind of transformed your journey. Do you have your laptop?
Yeah.
So this is done. I think John Delaney is his name. He has a podcast. It's on the Ramsey Network, and he's kind of a counselor. And he had this other guy on here. I forget the guy's name. Is a Harvard business professor, and he is a professor of happiness. That's like what he studies, is how to be happy. And in this, they were talking about happiness in relationships, but they talk a bit about grief right here.
When you're in the process of grief, when you're in the process of loss, at the very beginning, you need somebody who will sit with you, who will simply love you, to be sure.
That's right.
But the process of grief actually turns into the process of healing when you do one big thing, which is when you become the person who's sitting with somebody else.
That's it.
You want to heal? Go heal somebody.
That's right.
Go love somebody. That's the key thing.
So it's just that small clip about grief can transform and what they've seen is when you begin to try to heal somebody else. And so digging a little bit deeper into your personal story, would you say, I guess, tell us where you were kind of at from an emotional standpoint, a grief standpoint, a mental standpoint, when you actually started Billy's Place?
So by that point, let's see, it was 2000. So I was about 3 or 4, I was about 4 years into my grief journey at that time. And, everybody relies on something different. I have a faith in God. And so that is really, I think, what I had from the very beginning held on to. And so it really was that's what got me through it. And so at that point, I think I feel like I was in a good place. I did a lot of work when I was at Dr. Alan Wolfelt's program. His program is not only there to teach, to explain what grief is, but you do a lot of hard work. There was a lot of people there that were still wanting to learn more about grief for themselves, for losses. And I really didn't realize how much that I hadn't unpacked myself. And so in that time, I did. I learned quite a bit more that I kind of was holding on to. And so it was that was like a nice, I don't want to say an end because there's never an end, but it was just a good point in my journey to realize how far I had come. And how far I still needed to go a little. I would say I still needed to go because I think there's always room, it never ends. And I think you're always continually, going on that journey. So I would say, I was in a good place. I was searching for So Dr. Alan Wolfelt has 6 needs of mourning, which they go all over the place. You know, you could be at this point 1 minute, acknowledging the loss is like the first step, right? But it's not neat and orderly. You wish it would be. But I think step 4 or 5 is like the meaning, right? What was the purpose behind this? Mm-hmm. Some people may never find that meaning.
Yeah.
For me, it's Billy's place, you know, wholeheartedly. I feel, like I said, God put it upon my heart and he showed me every way of it, like through the job at Copper Hills, like my church. That is something that I never would have thought I would have been an admin. I was a hairstylist, you know, and I didn't go for a job. My pastor asked me, you know, so that to me was like, okay. And then I learned everything I needed to for a nonprofit. So that happened. It's just, and ever since then, my sister-in-law, we joke because she always says, Juli, can you pray to your Jesus that this works out? And so I always, you know, I'm always like, okay, I'm putting prayers in. But he really has just laid out things when it's almost looked impossible.
Yeah.
And so I know Mike, I know if he could see what was happening, I mean, he'd lay down his life for that any minute for how many people he's helped in Arizona and just all over. And so it's been pretty amazing.
So would you agree with the video that it's helped you to create Billy's Place to help you through some of your grief?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say it did. I mean, just knowing that Mike's death has caused people, like when you see happiness, you know, like to me, being at Winter Wonderland, I don't want to cry. So, but I have like pictures on my phone of a couple boys, you know, I'm like, can I get a picture? And I mean, we use them for different things, but when you just see them smiling, to me, that makes all of the difference. And when you see parents connecting, we have a group of parents that they lost spouses, and they all still go out together, these women. Wow. And they're friends on Facebook now. And when they're bantering back and forth with each other, because I'm friends with them all and on Facebook, but when I see them bantering, it still just makes me, I just think they were brought together, you know what I mean, from Billy's Place. And I just think that's so cool that they have this bond, most likely for the rest of their lives. You know, they still go out, they still connect, and it's pretty awesome.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So some of the things, I do think it's amazing, yes. And to get into some of the numbers, do you know any of the numbers? I looked at your historical records and you talked about the amount of people that you guys have impacted. From what I could see, it's somewhere in like the upwards of 4,000 something people that have come to some of the different group nights. Is that kind of in the ballpark? Do you know that off the top of your head?
I do not know that. I don't want to, we always say numbers. I know in our last, I always say go to the website because it has our yearly figure, like in our.
So the 2023 impact report, it talked about 386 people that had come, that had registered for that. It also had an increase of people that were actually requesting help too. And then the previous year before that, number wise, it just set a percentage increase, which off the top of my head was 52% increase from 2021 to 2022. And so rough numbers I did was in like that one put it at like 3,000 something.
You have a great memory. I'm like, I don't know if I could remember. No, so I do know. So it has changed a little. So it's hard to compute like different numbers because we are now in the schools.
Yeah.
And so it's like just for group nights alone, that would sound correct.
Yeah. And I pulled only the numbers of the group nights because I didn't know and I didn't understand enough about the school stuff. And so it was great that you could explain kind of what you're doing in the school. But yes, there is more information in there. You delineate it between group nights and school stuff.
Yeah. So it's, and then we have our whole other thing where we're a resource center. And so we have like, I'll talk to people and they may be in California, right? And they're like, but they just don't know where to go. And I have the resources of telling them I can find a place in California for them really quick and I can send them over there. And they may just not be in the place where they're like, I can tell usually like they're not going to probably head over there for a while. And so I said, can I send you some stuff? And so we have different brochures. We have tons of different brochures, handouts, books that we can send people. And so there's that part of it. And that's reaching people, in one way. And then there's our group nights, and then there's our school bereavement. So what we have our New York Life, which we do our training, and then we now have a program where we have our Billy's Place curriculum, and we actually give that to the schools. So we go in, I think we've done Tempe now, we're in Prescott, Flagstaff. Wow. And so all of those schools now are doing grief trainings for their kids. Oh, wow.
For the students.
For the students.
That's amazing.
And so that is reaching now a whole nother set of kids that couldn't get in. A lot of kids, they, after school, if their parent has died, a lot of them can't get back. Their moms might be working 2 jobs, or the dads, don't want to go, or working 2 jobs. You just don't know what the story is. Yeah. And so it's so awesome that now they don't have to go out. They can stay after school or during their lunch period. So we're super excited about that. But I believe that figure was 115,000.
Yeah, that one's way more on that side.
So that is really cool. That's when we think of that number added on with, because that's another thing. So we are limited on our capacity. We are at full capacity at Billy's Place right now. We cannot do any other nights.
Is that because of the size, or is that because of the volunteers and like the coaches and stuff?
We could double those in a minute. It's because of our size.
At the actual physical location.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we're looking for other places, and my eventual goal has always been to have a home.
To have a house that looks like the one that you went to.
I know that's not going to be, because old Victorian would be really hard. Old but furniture. If somebody has an old Victorian they'd like to donate. But my sister-in-law, Chris, is amazing. She's an amazing executive director. And like I said, she could be an architect. She could be but she's a great designer. And so she's already got millions of things planned out for, we had property donated to us by Bailey's Ranch, and some great people who own that. So that is an acre right next to Bailey's Ranch, which, what do they have there? They have puppies.
Wow.
So, but it's hard in Peoria. It's hard to get permits and do all that kind of stuff. So that's been, that's hard for a nonprofit, to get permits, and it's hard to pay for all of that.
Yeah.
When you don't know for sure if you're even going to get them, know? So we're working on that, but we're also looking into other avenues of buying or of renting bigger spaces like what we have now.
Yeah.
So we have our eye on one. And so it would be amazing. So we're hoping we can kind of do something with that, hopefully in this year. And that
Super
would
cool.
be able to expand our groups even more. So,
That's really awesome.
yeah.
And if somebody wants to get on board and help out with Billy's Place, whether being a volunteer or donating somehow, how can they do that?
Yep. So all they have to do is go to the website. And so if they go to billysplace.me, there is a section on there for volunteering. And we're always looking for board members. I think we have 1 or 2 spots open for board members. We have volunteering always open for being a facilitator. And some people are scared. They're like, I don't know if I could be in a room with kids or adults who are going through grief. We have tons of other things. We have pizza helpers, admin help. We have ladies that come and do addressing envelopes. They love that. So, but we have all sorts of stuff. Life groups come in. They serve people dinner once in a while. So there's plenty of things on the volunteering front that they could do. And we also have like schools, Mountain Ridge, they come in and they need to get hours for school. So like for the Hike for Hope, they do that. So
And then,
lots of areas.
And then just on the website, you can also donate money as well.
Yep. So we have our donate button on there and lots of ways to do that. There is our monthly donating that you could be a Hope Champ. And that's what we call our monthly donors.
Is there a limit on that or anything? A limit as in like, in order to be a Hope Champ, you have to give a certain amount of money, or is it just that you do it every month, or what's the deal with that?
Yeah, you could, like for me, I do $50 a month. And it just comes out directly, whatever form you want to pay that. We also have the tax credits. So a lot of people like that, which I think it went up this year. It's like up to $900. It used to be,
Oh, wow.
I think $400 for a single person and $800 for a married couple. But now it's up. So that's always a win-win.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of people understand that you'll get that money right back on your taxes. I'm always like, do the state tax. And he's like, I'm not giving you $400. And I'm like, you're going to get it right back. And we always joke with him about that. Finally, I got him on board this year, but
That's funny.
So that one's a great one. And then you could just do a one-time donation, Hike for Hope. You could come out to that. Some people like live, the silent auction. That's always a great one because you do get something in return for it. So those are, ways that, if you want, there's other ideas you have, you could always call us and we, we'd be happy to hear anyways, any ways that you can think of. Madeline or Chris, our executive director, would be happy to hear any thoughts that you have.
Cool. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming and sharing a little bit about Billy's Place and the inspiration behind it and how everything kind of came about and the whole story. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for letting me be here tonight and share my story.
Thanks for joining us on the Lost Child podcast. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe. And remember, shine bright, and we'll see you in the next episode.